This talk is about Rem Koolhaas as a theoretician and as a practitioner. And as we mentioned in the previous talk, he wrote this book, Delirious New York, in his 30s, and then now he's in his 70s. Up here we're seeing him when he's in his 40s, shortly after Delirious New York on the left. Look at all that hair. And then this is Rem Koolhaas pretty much now in his 70s. And through that period has had an incredibly long and prolific career as a practitioner. So again, as we've been doing, we're going to be looking at our notes that have been distributed, and we'll be looking at 7 different topics that he discusses and look at the way that that played out in buildings that he's designed. And then we'll be looking to have in class a discussion of those 7 topics and other things as well regarding Rem Koolhaas as a theoretician and a practitioner. So the first topic I want us to discuss is on this notion of congestion and density and radical mixed use. So this is something that he admires in New York. He admires in particular in Rockefeller Center. He disdains in the case of Lincoln Center. So this is what he says. The genius of Rockefeller Center is that it is at least 5 projects at the same time. In post-war Manhattan, Lincoln Center is doomed to be only 1 project. Culture lovers have paid for the dissolution of Manhattan's poetic density. Manhattan no longer supports an infinite number of superimposed and unpredictable activities on a single site. That's the key thing here. An infinite number of superimposed and unpredictable activities on a single site. It has regressed back to the clarity and predictability of univalence, to the known. So he much prefers Rockefeller Center in this radical mixed use where you get energy from many different activities happening kind of in the same place at the same time and creating this culture of congestion. So this is a project that he did very, very early in his practice career. It's in Amsterdam. It's called the Byzantium, and it is a mixed-use project. It has part office building that we're seeing right here. It has part residential, which we're seeing right here. It has a lot of retail along here. It even has a nightclub, which is kind of sticking out at that point there. It's on a major, major street in Amsterdam. And in fact, this is the older quarter of Amsterdam over here. And as you probably know, Amsterdam's full of canals and waterways penetrating the city. And then there's kind of that last canal. And then there's peripheral road right here. And just outside that road is the Byzantium right there. So it's in a very, very critical site. And on this side is where all the residential activities are. We were seeing that residential side there. And that's facing onto a green park that goes back through there and connects to a larger park over here. So that's the soft green area that kind of enters into the old quarter of the city at that point. But on the other side of this lot, right here, begins a kind of commercial district, much more office district that you're seeing right there. More residential on this side, more office on this side. And there's no such beautiful views into green over here. So this becomes the office side of the building, relating to the context there. The residential side of the building, relating to the soft green area and the residential fabric over there. So it is becoming that radical mixed use for a very good reason, because it's in this transition moment in the city. And then on the ground floor, because it's on a major route, and that major route has bus lines and trolley lines that go along it, and so there are major trolley stop right here. And all of that retail is in a prime spot to take advantage of that pedestrian traffic that's there. So we get the retail very logically there. And then the one other element is this nightclub, which is there looking over the old city and the canals. And by that, when you get up that height, it has a spectacular view back to the old city. So again, it has a very good reason for being right in that spot. So it is radical mixed use. It is all the residential we saw on the other side. We see the office building here, extending the office behind on that side street, more retail that's showing in that sort of denser quarter of the city. Then on the other side, we see the residential, and as it wraps around, balconies, outdoor spaces, all those looking out to that green space. And on the street, no, not retail, quiet, more private, much more residential kind of street. So this is the notion of radical mixed use. You look at the piece of the city and you figure out what needs to be done there, and you put it all together, and it doesn't have to be tidy. It doesn't have to be univalent, which he says is a scourge on the city. Okay, so that was one notion, this on congestion and density and radical mixed use. You agree? You disagree? What do you think about that? A second idea on luxury, sensuality, pleasure, and physical culture of relaxation. In some ways, you got to say this guy, Rem Koolhaas, he's kind of a hedonist. He really loves kind of sensual, exotic, hedonistic places. So in the book, he says, the materialistic Philistines of New York had invented and built an oniric field devoted to the pursuit of fantasy, synthetic emotion, and pleasure, its ultimate configuration both unpredictable and uncontrollable. This is what he admires. Fantasy, synthetic emotion, pleasure, things that are unpredictable and uncontrollable. And I think he tries to inject that into some of his buildings as well. This one is the Villa d'Alva, again, an early building in his career. It's in Paris, and it's a rather large and luxurious single-family house. It is incredibly exotic. I think pleasure, synthetic emotion, unpredictability, all of these are very much characteristic of the Villa d'Alva. So there's a swimming pool on the top up here, a very precarious swimming pool, a scary, scary swimming pool, where if you fall off, you cracked your skull. But when you're up there, oh my God, a view of the Eiffel Tower and all of Paris down below, and this sensual, just weird, crazy, exotic kind of feeling on the roof of this Villa d'Alva. And that's not the only place. From the street, he left the fragment of the old wall that was there, just a beat up old masonry wall. You can slip in on one side to the garage there, or you can slip in a front door right here that takes you up a little windy path and through the yard to the front door, which is under this really kind of super high porch. So it's perched up here are 2 bedrooms. You would have come in off the street there. 2 bedrooms perched up here, the master bedroom perched up here, the swimming pool in between, and then living room, dining room, kitchen down on the ground floor. There you can see how open that ground floor is to the garden all the way around. It's not a big lot, but it's all glass, and so you see right straight through to the walls that they've created against the neighbors' houses on either side. There you can see that little slip of a lot there. On the ground floor, it's just one big open plain defined by the walls of the lot around it. There you see that entrance into the garage at the lower level where you go into the garage there. And then on the upper level, you go into that living room, dining room, kitchen, and then on up at this end to 2 bedrooms. At the other end, a separate stair to the master bedroom, and in between that sexy swimming pool in the middle. There we are coming up that little path from the street to the front door, and in that front door under the porch. Then to that main level, which is just all glass looking out to the garden on all sides. These exotic doors that open at the corner, so you can slide those glass doors back, and then you've just got the indoors and outdoors completely integrated together. This super exotic kitchen with kind of milky, translucent walls to it, so it gets natural light, but still a little privacy in that kitchen. These, again, scary stairs, scary pool and scary stairs, but no handrail to speak of. These, windy stairs that turn into little cantilevered stick stairs beside it. And then this range of materials, particle board, plywood, plastics, exotic kinds of materials, not particularly fine materials, but exotic materials, strange, provocative, sensual materials, lots of texture, lots of color. So again, it's this kind of thinking of architecture as something stimulating and sensual and pleasurable. Again, a major goal in Rem Koolhaas's work. Okay, a third topic on the value of the conceptual, mental, and man-made over the natural and real. Again, this could be a controversial idea, but he says the grid, in its indifference to topography in New York, to what exists, claims the superiority of mental construction over reality. It announces that the subjugation, if not obliteration, of nature is its true ambition. So he sees New York, even, for instance, he talks about in Central Park, not natural. Frederick Law Olmsted fabricated everything in there. The whole notion of New York is to completely be man-made, nothing natural there at all. He says, the metropolis strives to reach a mythical point where the world is completely fabricated by man, so that it absolutely coincides with his desires. So this is maybe a pretty radical notion that things that are man-made are superior to things that are natural. But this is a very long-standing Dutch idea. They made their whole country. It was water and marshland, and they put up dikes and they fabricated a country. So the notion of everything being man-made is part of his cultural heritage, and his notion is that things that are man-made are superior to things that are natural. So as an example of this is an environment that he did in Las Vegas, the Guggenheim Museum in Las Vegas. It is incredible sensory overload and everything fabricated by man. Nothing having to do with nature at all here. And of course, that's what Las Vegas is. Las Vegas is a desert that everything has been done to try to keep you from knowing you're in the desert. It's all fabricated to seem like someplace else. So this piece that he did, the Guggenheim Museum, is in the Venetian Hotel. And the Venetian Hotel has got a little miniature Tor San Marco like Venice, a little miniature Doge's Palace, Bridge of Sighs. So it's kind of a miniature world of Venice smashed into Las Vegas, and there are canals and gondolas that take you around through the Venetian Hotel. And then once you get inside, it's actually kind of like a huge shopping mall, but made to seem like the streets of Venice. So we're walking along and there's shops there. That actually, it's completely indoors. It's an indoor shopping mall because you're in the freaking desert. It's hotter than hell in Las Vegas. But inside here, it's 72 degrees. And that's a fake sky. It looks incredibly real. But in fact, it's all fabricated. Everything here is man-made. So Rem Koolhaas looks at that and says, nothing wrong with that. That's superior to the natural. So he's in that context. You actually go from the Venetian Hotel right into the Guggenheim Museum. So that area we just saw with its checkerboard paving is now running right up to the Guggenheim Museum, where you see the big letters spelling out Guggenheim there and the ticketing area right there, these gargantuan, again, sign elements that become a major part of the architecture. You get your tickets over here, and then you go into this space that is, in a way, a kind of cacophony of color and light and display, but a completely fabricated space. Here you're walking along and there actually are signs that say Guggenheim along here, but you're seeing through the letters and you're seeing into the exhibition space, but all the reflections on the glass, and that's kind of the feeling here. Is just kind of bombarded with architecture, man-made things everywhere. And inside, the time I was there, it was an exhibition of motorcycles, these beautiful old Ducati motorcycles and Harley Davidsons, and they were these man-made objects, very much fabricated objects in this space, and they looked absolutely dazzling. A huge stair here that's just full of color and light and all the donors' names along here. And then this exhibition space. And it is a complete fabrication. It's a fantasy world. And there's nothing that is referential to where you are or sun or light or any of those kinds of things necessarily on the outside. But again, the ability to take all of the factors, take the sun and make it yours and make it do what you want it to do. Make the views about things you want to see, which are the fabricated things that are there. And sort of take you out of the real world or the natural world and into this kind of fabricated and fantasy world. So the fourth point I want us to talk about is his comments on aggressiveness and ambition and progress. So he says that he's seeking, quote, a formula for an architecture that is once ambitious and popular. Ambitious and popular. He says it is the arduous task of the final part of this century to deal with the extravagant and megalomaniac claims, ambitions, and possibilities of the metropolis openly. The extravagant and megalomaniacal claims, and to deal with them openly. So how can we take the city and how can we really take the constraints off and just deal with what's there in a very kind of brash and open way? And the building I want us to look at to talk about that is the Illinois Institute of Technology Student Center building, the McCormick Tribune Campus Center. And it is relatively near downtown Chicago. It's right on an elevated line, one of the train lines that runs through Chicago. And it was a very interesting site because the site is in an area that is right on the IIT campus right there. But it's one that has the elevated train running through it. So this campus was all designed by Mies van der Rohe. That's Crown Hall, the architecture school right there. This was kind of the residential part of the campus over here. This is more the academic part of the campus over here. And right in between was the Student Center. That's the Mies Student Center right there. And what they were looking for was an expansion of the Student Center between the housing area and the academic area. But the elevated railroad, came right through the site. So again, they had a big competition and 5 renowned architects. And every one of them either put the Student Center on this side of the elevated train or on that side of the elevated train. But Rem Koolhaas was the only one who said, well, we're going to straddle underneath the elevated track, and then we're going to put what he called a condom on the elevated track, and protect the building from that. And that becomes what the building is all about. So there is that condom that is housing the train, and then the building is sliding under the elevated track and the protection of that tube. And now that really does link the two sides of the campus together incredibly effectively. And it was, you can barely make all that work with head heights to get under the train, but there's a concrete sheath around that which protects the sound. Of course, when the train goes through there, rackety, 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 you know, it needs a lot of acoustical protection. So that's what that condom does. And then the other functions slide under that. Very interesting materials that kind of take off on Mies van der Rohe. So the glass curtain wall, but now with a material called panelite in there, which is giving more insulation than glass and gives a kind of color and translucency to the wall. So a lot of experimentation with materials in the building. Some beautiful curtain work inside one of the auditoriums there, with a reference to that's how Mies van der Rohe drew trees, so that becomes a pattern in the curtain there. Again, a play on the kind of Mies van der Rohe divisioning of glass that's across the street, but now linking the two sides of campus under the elevated train. So the student center itself, the train goes through about right there, and it is normal student center kind of functions. The existing Mies van der Rohe building is right there, protected. There's a little courtyard around it, so you do barely kind of link into it on two sides, but mostly it's completely like it was. And then the paths through the building, much more diagonal, taking you across and through to various parts of the campus. So you enter the academic side of the campus there, and it takes you out many different directions to the residential side of the campus and other areas as well. And inside, extremely dynamic spatially. And then all of that with this tube surmounted on those big supports as it goes through right there. But very complex spatially in that area. Now, the point is, we're trying to find an architecture that expresses frankly the challenges of the city. So we got the damn train going through here. How do you just take that and run with it and express it openly? And that's what the big tube does. And then how do you just take in a very frank and blatant and forthright way? What are all these other functions? How do I connect point A and point B? How do I make it work with the old building? And it's all kind of circumstantial and beautifully worked out. So occasionally you see the train dipping down through the ceiling of the student center there, right next to the pool tables, as you see. They're normal student center kinds of functions. There's a kind of sunken court through here with beautiful light through a kind of raised courtyard up there. Very complex spatially in the center of the building, but allowing a lot of light to penetrate into places like that dining area. These little emblems of all the functions in the student center, eating, studying, pool, recreation, all of those things are used as graphic symbols throughout the building. Other kinds of graphics that are in there, like those Mies van der Rohe trees in the curtains. The panelite is used sometimes to make this furniture where it's curved there, those curvy plastic pieces. This is that little courtyard that looks across to the existing Mies van der Rohe building. And then there are these fritted glass portraits of various important people in the history of IIT. In fact, sort of right across here at the front door, there's a picture of Mies van der Rohe. And when the door opens, it's like Mies opens his mouth and lets you into the building. And Mies van der Rohe looks at his buildings on the academic campus just across the way over here. So it's a building full of adjustments to urban conditions. And again, that's what Koolhaas recommends, is that we not just adjust to them and try to hide them. We do it openly, blatantly, and that makes more exciting and revelatory architecture. So the fifth topic I wanted to talk about is on the paranoid critical method. And if you guys are anything like previous classes, people kind of read through that paranoid critical method and think, oh my gosh, I don't have a clue what he's talking about. And it's partly his slightly perverse use of language. But if you start out by saying paranoid is not a negative thing here, a paranoid person sees something that's not real, sees the world as being some evil concoction of a place that is not actual reality. But in a more generic sense, you could say paranoid is simply that you see something that's not there. You see something invisible to other people. You see something that's a fantasy in your head. So the paranoid critical method is about seeing these fantasies in your head and then in a critical way dealing with them. So again, a quotation from him. He says, "The paranoid critical method is a sequence of two consecutive but discrete operations. A, the synthetic reproduction of the paranoiac's way of seeing the world in a new light." Okay, that's the first step. You see the world in a new light. B, the compression of these gaseous speculations to a critical point where they can achieve the density of fact. So now you take that fantasy world, that fabricated world, and you compress it into the density of a fact. So you accept it as real, as something that's there. And then there's a third step. Then the critical part of the method consists of the fabrication of objectifying souvenirs of the paranoid tourism. So the third step is then to take that thing that now seems real and design around it. Make souvenirs or artifacts that respond to that thing that was completely fabricated, became real, and now is the context for responding to it as if it were absolutely real. So that's the paranoid critical method. He says, paranoid critical activity is the fabrication of evidence for unprovable speculations and the subsequent grafting of this evidence on the world so that false fact takes its lawful place alongside real fact. So all of that becomes just as tangible and as visceral as reality would be. And then he concludes at the end of the book that architecture is inevitably a form of paranoid critical activity. So that's what we do as architects. Number one, we fabricate this world that is in our head. That's his notion. We fabricate a world that's in our head. We make it so real that it becomes as tangible as it can be. And then we design for that world of the future, or that world of fabricated reality, and then leave those souvenirs back in the real world. That's what he sees as a process for making architecture. So let's look at an example of that. I would say that's true of the Seattle Public Library, which is probably his most well-known building at this point. So this is in the middle of downtown Seattle, and it is a series of fantastic ideas about what a library could be or how people might use a library kind of space. And then it's all kind of wrapped in this crazy envelope and bundled together and dropped into downtown Seattle. So none of those forms actually reflect any particular function or any particular accommodation of something that needs to be on the inside. It's just a big kind of wrapper around the building. That's how it sits in downtown Seattle. You can see right in the middle of the city there, this big kind of lump that sits among the other buildings and actually has very, very little relationship to any of them. And again, as we were seeing in the case of Seattle Art Museum, it's a very hilly city. And you enter on a high side, you enter on a low side. So its entrances are even kind of discombobulated from each other. And then there are all these kind of singular fantasies. There is this whole place where you store the books. And it's like a parking garage ramp where you ramp up, ramp up, ramp up, ramp up, ramp up. So you don't actually have separate floors. It's a continuous helix going all the way up. And it goes according to the Dewey Decimal System. So in the Library of Congress system, you just wrap up according to those numbers. So if you're looking for a book, you never have to say, oops, it's on the next floor up. It's continuous with the Dewey Decimal System all the way through. That kind of machine for storing books. So that's one kind of fantasy world of this fabrication for storing books. And then there's another place that is called the mixing chamber. And that's what's referred to right there. And that is this completely blood red environment. And it's for kind of community activities. But again, a completely separate idea of this kind of community series of rooms that are all blood red. And then there is on the ground floor what he calls the living room, this big open space, which really is just kind of a hangout space. Some books there, but mostly just a hangout space. And then on the top, there is this reading room, which kind of overlooks the city. But all of those are just connected in a kind of tenuous way by these umbilicals, but they're little fabrications of fantastic elements that are then strung together and plopped in the city. There you can see that kind of garage ramp system for storing all of the books through there. You can see the reading room up at the top. You can see the mixing chamber through here, that red environment. And the big, down here on the ground floor at the two levels, that whole living room kind of space. Crazy section. So you would enter, this is at the lower part of the building, into that big living room. When you enter at that lower part, you're going into international books, and the floor has alphabets of, 24 languages or something that are etched on the floor there. Or you can enter at the upper part of the building over here, and again, you're in that same big living room area that's just kind of an enormous hangout space with cafes and lots of homeless people and a few books and computers around there as well. And then there's this huge atrium that just links all those individual bits and parts together, and these views vertiginous views that scare the hell out of people that go up to the edge. Whoa, dude, I can't look down there. But it's really dramatic. And then winding all the way through are these bright yellow stairs and escalators. And they let you know how to get to other pieces and parts. There's a great auditorium that links the lower level entry and the upper level entry. And along there, then you have seats that look down to a stage down below. But it also can just be circulation from one level to the other. There's that amphitheater. And the yellow stair constantly as your landmark to take you up and around. And then this is that parking ramp of books with all the Dewey Decimal System notations on the floor there. And at the top, the big reading room. And then this is that mixing chamber. So this is meeting rooms and community activity spaces, puppet shows, things like that in there, but in this incredibly blood red, kind of crazy fantasy environment. This is where he's doing the paranoid critical method. He's creating this fantasy world, and then he's designing this thing in this fantasy world, and then he's bringing it as a souvenir and putting it back into the Seattle Public Library. And then this is that reading room at the very top, kind of perched up there above the city. Big, open, airy kind of space. Okay, I think the same kind of thing, to some extent, the paranoid critical method, it's happening in the Cornell School of Architecture as well. Again, it's this idea of, can I fabricate this amazing thing? And then maybe it's in my head. It's just this crazy ass thing. And then I just bring it back and I stick it as a souvenir in the real world. And it may be a little disjointed, but that's cool. That's not a problem. That's really what architects should do. They should stretch things that way. And that's, I think, what happens at the Cornell School of Architecture. So he has this idea of a big studio, one big flat studio. Everybody all on the same floor, all these different courses interacting with each other. And Cornell had their School of Architecture was in an old building that had lots of little cranky rooms. They didn't ever have all that kind of continuity of space and studio culture that some other schools had. So he's giving them that. But unfortunately, the site was just too small for any of that to happen. The site came to here. And the kind of space that was the existing building back over there. So there just wasn't room to do this. And so, well, what the hell, we're going to do it anyway. And it just stretches right over the street there and cantilevers out over a fairly busy street over to the side over there. And the whole building is cantilevered in all directions and smacks up against all the other buildings around it and just kind of saucily slides itself in there. So there you see the existing School of Architecture building and this radical cantilever over the street there. It kind of sits on an auditorium as a kind of fulcrum for putting that cantilever across. And you can see that the whole building then just becomes a big truss that enables that to happen and to cross over the street down here and connect to the old historic building of the School of Architecture. So here we see the historic building. This is that big studio. That's what we needed. That's the fantasy in my mind, this enormous, completely contiguous studio space. So bugger what any property lines, or we just make it happen, and we just throw it in there and have it consume all of that space between all of these buildings and slide over the street as well. So there you can see the existing School of Architecture building, the studio space stretching out and cantilevering over the street right here and over the street right there. That shows how it was a heroic thing to do. It was not easy and meant building this superstructure that could be this magnificent big truss and make that kind of span that was necessary. And then underneath it, there's this undercroft below that has that auditorium and jury space that is the fulcrum that the cantilever goes across. And that's just a ton of concrete that comes up and catches the building and lets it cantilever over. And then inside, you can very much feel the concrete part of the building where this fulcrum is, and everything's overscaled and kind of gigantic. And then from there, you move up to the truss space up there at the top, and everything is in amongst all these trusses that are spanning across there. Little amphitheater for jurying in the middle of that open space, an open stair that takes you down to the auditorium and jury space down there. And then that's what it looks like. Of course, it's a sea of complete chaos. And what are architecture schools about? Mess, workshop, crazy, tons and tons of shit, And so that's really what this big, big open space is all about. And that's what it looks like, when I was there. And, just action and lively and all of that, but piles and piles of stuff. That was that auditorium down below. And then as you get up, that begins to be that entry point and the fulcrum that the truss sits on top of, and then the big space of the studios up above that, and skylights that bring light in the center of the studio. Now these are the photographs of OMA showing how clean and white and light it is, but of course that's not actually how it feels when you're there. Okay, this notion of that you can just fabricate this thing in your head and you can bring it to full fruition and make it really real in your head, and then you just graft it onto the world and onto reality. That's how architecture should behave. The seventh and final topic I want us to discuss is this notion of globalization. And in the book, Koolhaas says, any process of colonization, the graft of a particular culture onto an alien site, is in itself a paranoid critical process. So this is in many ways what architecture has been in Koolhaas's generation, especially a kind of star architect like himself. You fly into a place and you graft onto it something that came from another world, and you put it there. And as far as he's concerned, that's what I'm hired to do. I'm hired to bring these things and graft them onto different cultures in different places. And in the case of the building I want us to look at here, it's in Beijing. It's the CCTV tower. And I think that's exactly accurate, that the government in China, they were having the Olympics come to Beijing. And the Olympics were all about TV. And so their state-run TV was going to be the host for all of the different TV stations all over the world that would be showing the Olympics. They wanted this badass, big, bold statement that would create a place for all these TV stations to be. Now, unfortunately, they didn't get it finished in time for the Olympics, so that actually didn't happen. But the notion was that we're building a place that's going to make a big statement to the world, and it just happens to be in downtown Beijing. But it isn't meant to really be of Beijing. It's meant to just be grafted onto Beijing. And I think that's very much what the CCTV tower feels like. It's a piece of sculpture. As you move around in the city, it's constantly changing and morphing. It's extremely powerful as sculpture. It's also crazy-ass daring and dynamic, these incredible double cantilevers that create that shape, and then these wild patterns of diagonals across the outside. There is both the CCTV tower, and then they also did the TVCC tower over here, and a whole precinct around it. Incredibly complicated and heavy structure. This is so much steel per square foot in order to make it do what steel doesn't want to do, what structures and what towers don't want to do. But it certainly makes a very powerful statement. This is CCTV and that's TVCC right there. Really just bombed out a whole piece of downtown Beijing and recreated it completely. But for Koolhaas, this is the way it needs to be, grafted onto one culture, grafted onto another culture. And again, some precedent of that in his background as a Dutch person and the colonization that they did. So the seventh and final topic I want us to discuss is, again, kind of parallel to what Venturi talked about, but this inside out and outside in. So this is Koolhaas's attitude, a little different than Venturi. He says, by separating exterior and interior architecture and developing the latter in small autonomous elements, structures can devote their exterior only to formalism and their interior only to functionalism. In this way, they not only resolve forever the conflict between form and function, but create a city where permanent monoliths celebrate metropolitan instability. So the idea is that you make the outside be what the outside wants to be. And you make the inside, and that should be in a formal sense in the world. And you make the inside what the inside wants to be. And they don't necessarily have to talk to each other. They can be separate things. In a way, we could see that in CCTV, we could see that in Seattle Public Library, but you can certainly see it in the Wiley Theater in Dallas as well, where it's in the Arts District. It's probably the smallest building in the Arts District, but he wanted to have tremendous presence. So it's a big, tall, cubic kind of building that sits very strong and square in the city. It does not look like a theater at all. There's no breaking down into fly loft and auditorium and entry. And this is a big, solid box, a big, strong statement. And it's made out of these stainless steel tubes that then get slender where there's any kind of window and are just solid the rest of the way around the building. In the Texas sun, just gleams. It's very shimmery, and it has these crazy textures to it. So it's just a big piece of extremely bold sculpture. And that's what the exterior he thought needed to be in that district in downtown. It's competing with all these really big buildings. It just needed to be a big, strong, vertical, cubic statement. And inside, we'd figure that out in a different kind of way. So you actually enter the building by going low down under the ground and entering at a lower level. That's the main stage level on the ground floor. You enter down in this lobby space you can see here. And then from that lower area, you would then go back up. That lower area also gives you access to underground parking down there. So his idea was all these suburban Dallasites are coming in, they're parking their cars, they're just going directly into the lobby. If anybody is coming as a pedestrian, they go down and into that lobby right there. And then the main performance area is on the ground level, and it's glass all the way around. And that fly loft it's there, but it's kind of hidden in that volume of the big, tall space. And then up above are patrons' lounge and offices and costume shop and rehearsal rooms and cafe and outdoor cafe. And so all of that is subsumed in this. But again, the interior space is not really reflected in the volume or on the exterior at all. It's all about functionalism on the interior. It's all about formalism on the exterior. And there you can see it in the Arts District, which goes from the Dallas Museum of Art, the Nasher Sculpture Center, the Meyerson Symphony Hall, the Opera House, the Wiley Theater there, all of that forming the Arts District, but right in the midst of downtown Dallas. Again, extremely heroic structure to make all that work, to make the fact that I want the performance space, which is a clear span space, to be underneath all this other stuff that's up here. So that had to take quite a dramatic structural cantilever. And inside there's everything from black box workshop space, patrons lounge with a beautiful outdoor terrace that overlooks the city, offices for all the people in the operating the place, and then this extraordinary performance space. And it's incredibly flexible. So all of these seats can be moved, all of the stage can be moved. It can be a thrust theater with people sitting on three sides like this. It can be a proscenium stage with everybody in the audience, and then just a conventional curtain in the front. All of it is completely movable and flexible, and is constantly redone all the time. So inside it's one kind of thing, outside it's another kind of thing, especially if we're talking about flexibility. Why would that be reflected on the outside? We have no idea what it's going to be one day to the next. It's constantly changing. So these are strong ideas about architecture. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. Hopefully we'll have a really rich and lively discussion about these and other ideas in Delirious New York. See ya.